Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're visiting with Mark Davidson, author of Iran's Great Invasion and Why It's Next in Bible Prophecy. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Rabbi.
Many people may know you as the author of Daniel Revisited, Discovering the Four Mighty Signs Leading to the Antichrist, that came out in February of 2016. And you have had other works that you have gone down the path of trying to make sense of what the world calls end-time prophecy, which I think is such a misnomer, because end-time prophecy is the beginning time of the millennial reign. So it's kind of a misnomer. The idea of a worldwide apocalypse, the end of the world scenarios, are just so anti-biblical, antithetical to the message of the Bible, that actually when I ask people, it says in Scripture, for you to have an answer for the hope that burns within you, and they all say, oh yes, my hope is, it happened. Jesus died on the cross and my sins were forgiven. And I said, then you are a person of no future. Hope is a future tense. Hope is never a past tense. Therefore, you're hopeless. Your hope's already been fulfilled. You have nothing to look forward to if that is your answer for the hope that you have. And they look at me askance and they say, well, then what are you saying? I said, my hope is in the fulfillment of the prophecy of Genesis 3:15, where the seed of the woman crushes the head of the seed of the serpent and rules and reigns on this earth for 1,000 years and brings about the new heaven and the new earth, and we are eternally living in this Garden of Eden that God created for us to begin with. I said, I look forward to each and every day for that to come, but I also know that there must be a series of events that has to take place prophetically in a particular sequence. Things have to happen in order to set the stage for the return of the Messiah. When we look in your background, you're an engineer by training.
That's right.
But yet this became a passion of yours, and some would say that you have formulated a point of view that may or may not agree with the mainstream 11 o'clock at night Christian television posture and position. What piqued your interest in prophecy? Where did that all start for you?
Well, I was raised in the churches from a young age and read Hal Lindsey's book, Late Great Planet Earth, and found it interesting and decided, okay, I'm going to wait and look for Christ's coming. Then in my 20s and 30s, early 30s, I fell away from the churches, did my own thing, and it was in 1997, Christ made it clear to me that he had to be my God, so I got on my knees and repented and decided to follow him with everything I am and have. And it was 4 years later when 9/11 occurred, and those Muslims flew airplanes into, the World Trade Center, that it just hit me in my soul. Lord, what's going on? And it just didn't seem normal. It's like, this isn't supposed to happen. It just the script didn't seem to be followed. So I put it up to the Lord. I just asked him for wisdom. Would you please show me what you're doing? What is your plan? And he showed me. I basically went on a path of research, and he kind of guided it, and it led me to the 4 signposts in Daniel Revisited.
How was that?
And I was going to say one more thing.
Yes.
And what I discovered, I believe, was of such import that it was basically a warning to the church. I felt I had to get the word out.
And the core of that message was what?
That there are 4 major events to occur in the Middle East prior to the tribulation or the rapture that have been missed all these centuries, and that they present these 4 predicted events, and one of them already occurred. In fact, I discovered it 2 weeks before it occurred, which was a shock to me. So that's the basic message of these signposts.
And what were those 4 events?
The first event was that the end time or latter version of Babylon, its government was to be changed from something beastly to something civilized. And that had never happened in history before until George W. Bush announced he was going to take the international coalition, go into Iraq, remove Saddam Hussein, and put in a democracy. He was going to cause the beastly lion to stand and its mind changed to think more like a man. And the heads represent political authority. The second event is Iran is going to invade the entire Middle East except for Israel and follow through what the regime's wishes are, just as Daniel 8 says the Ram will get to do all it wants to do, which is to instill its revolution all over the Middle East and Islam, all of Islam if it can. The third event is the Turkey and 3 other Sunni nations will band together, form a coalition or a confederacy, and conquer back the Middle East and occupy Iran in the regime and form one giant great nation covering almost all the Middle East. That's the third event. Okay. The fourth event is that leader of that nation will die or be removed, and the whole nation will break into 4 major pieces. And I believe Susa, southwestern Iran, will be near the crux, the crossroads, the place where all 4 nations meet boundary-wise. And that the man who is going to be Antichrist, you will see him arise out of the northwestern country. And he will, as Daniel 8 says, his power will expand to the south, Egypt, and to the east, Arabia. And once he unites those 3, reunites them, then the other nations of Islam will recognize him as their promised Mahdi and will join him. And so then he will coalesce his 10-nation empire. That's the 4th event. And at that point, we will be at the threshold of the tribulation.
So if I look at the geographical breakdown, first of all, acknowledging there's only 3 continents mentioned in the Bible.
Right.
Asia, Africa, and Europe. So the Americas and the Australias were in this eschatological evaluation. We need to concentrate on the countries in the Bible where God focuses. The rising of the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, the seed of the serpent, going back to the original prophecy in that language, the Antichrist, would come out of the northwest corner of that, which would support the thoughts of Turkey being a location because the Jews and the Muslims are the ones that have to have a peace accord drafted. That's the warring entities, the descendants of Esau, the descendants of Ishmael, the descendants of Lot. Under Islam and Israel, there has to be a peace accord, and the broker of that peace accord would then, based on the number of his name according to Gematria, the Gematria of Hebrew, converting his name into Hebrew, and it has to add up to 666. The Muslims would never subject themselves to a Jewish leader.
Correct.
But the one who would rise up and say, I can control anyone coming against Israel if we enter into this agreement, it would seem logical that it would be a European with very strong Islamic connections, looking at it from a logical perspective. That dispels 90% of people out of there that say it's going to come out of Rome and out of the Catholic Church. That's a thought that's been discounted, really removed from common thought. The signing of the agreement is God's timetable for the day of the Lord, which is the first day of the tribulation. It's the start of that 7-year period that we read about, and we can then track the events that will take place into the rebuilding of the temple. I'm a advocate saying that you can't defile a temple that doesn't exist. I have close friends in the Greek world that say no, they were talking about your body, but I'm looking at this description of defiling the temple and then erecting an image of himself. That requires an independent building. So I believe that there will be a third temple, which will be the tribulation temple, and that the earthquake of Zechariah 14 is its destruction as the mount is split in two, and then all that resides on the mount, the third temple, the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is now taken into this abyss. In my Jewish Hebrew training mind, and in the both languages of the book of Daniel, Aramaic and Hebrew. So,
I do believe, I was just going to say, I believe there's a good chance the temple may be built before the tribulation.
Well, I'm in Israel every year. I'm in Israel every year for a couple of weeks, and have been for years and years and years. And the Temple Institute, which is well known, who is driving the process to build it, even though they know their own text, are feverishly working to build the third temple, to restore Jewish worship, which is a precursor. It is something that has to occur in order for it to end, because the period of the tribulation is that at the 3.5-year mark, Jewish worship ceases. Well, Jewish worship, and I don't care who you are, I can tell you as a 65-year-old observant Jewish person whose entire life has been in Judaism, Jewish worship comes under the sovereignty of God, occurs in the place of His choosing, and He tells us there is going to be a temple that He will not sanction, that He will not be present in. He tells us that temple will be built and that will exist. That to me must be the third temple. Right? And it can come and either be a catalyst to peace, a catalyst to those that believe in the Psalm 83 confederacy, and then a final resolution to that of being a peace accord, and the temple doesn't get destroyed during that period of time, and Jewish worship is restored. There's several different scenarios of the precursors to Ezekiel 38 and 39, 4 very specific ones in Ezekiel 38, that Israel has to be sovereign in the land. That is a Genesis 15 sovereignty. That means that what we look at today as Jordan is going to be part of Israel. What God calls sovereign, what man calls sovereign, are, what Rand McNally calls Israel and what God calls Israel are completely different. So the events that you describe, I completely agree with, that these are the alignments, and this is what we're watching. We're watching Boris Spassky and Bobby Fischer. Just as we watched this chess game and these strategic moves that none of us understood. The only people that understood it were the two of them. Even the commentators on the Russian side, the American side, could only speculate as to what they might have been thinking when they made that move.
Right.
We can only speculate as we look at these various alliances going on in the Middle East. What's so interesting about your new book, Iran's Great Invasion, is that 99% of the population of the world neither knows that Iran is Aram and that Iran was Persia, one and the same, and that the name Iran in Arabic means Aryan, which is the ethnic cleansing, the caliphate, the final solution that Adolf Hitler instituted in the extermination of the Jews. The renaming of Persia to Iran happened in the 30s as the Shah was a Nazi sympathizer. So we see this reshaping and this reforming and reflection to an alignment with the spirit of the Antichrist. It is in the world, and there are 1.5 billion adherents to it, that God has a prophecy about Edom, the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and we're watching. And we're watching with great wonder about the election in Iran, the power struggle within the aging Ayatollah, and who is going to be the next in line, and what part Iran is going to play using the $150 billion that we gave them to fund this coalition of their alliance with Russia, their alliance with those who also have an anti-Jewish, anti-Jesus sentiment. It's quite a fascinating set of developments that you first identified in your Daniel analysis, now are digging into in your Iran analysis, and I would say predicting that Iran's great invasion is what's next in Bible prophecy.
Yes.
What led you to that conclusion?
Well, back in the work I did with Daniel Revisited is when I discovered it. But in Iran's Great Invasion, what I talk about is that, first of all, Daniel 8 is an end-time fulfilled prophecy, I believe, because in 3 verses, verses 17, 19, and 26, the text of the Bible itself says that the vision of the ram and the goat applies to, or will be fulfilled in, or pertains to the end time, the end of the age. And so the first verse of action is where the ram's second horn grows longer, and I believe that has already occurred. When Iran was established as the Iranian, or as the Islamic Republic in 1979, the Constitution provided for the supreme leader who had all power in Iran. He was treated as the mouthpiece of God, and whatever he said, that was absolute rule. And so that's why in Daniel 8:3 it says that the horns were long. And at the time we had the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and it was a short, stubby little horn. In other words, all it was a bodyguard. But because of the war with Saddam Hussein in the 80s, it blew up and took over the military. Then it took over the economy. About half the economy in Iran is owned by the IRGC. It got into the intelligence arena. It got into politics. It got Ahmadinejad elected. And so today, experts realize that, who's stronger, Well, the supreme leader, he counted as being the authority, but the IRGC has really all the power to affect what the supreme leader says. And so, because I believe the horn has already grown up, the very next thing in Daniel 8 is, and the ram ran out to the north, the west, and the south, from Susa, from southwest Iran, from the one area in Iran that's a plain where you could roll out an invasion, because the rest of Iran is behind some very rugged mountains.
You know, it's interesting because sequentially, what you're saying from a Daniel 8 perspective leads us into our understanding of the 77s of Daniel 9:24 to 27.
Yeah.
And there are 6 very specific promises made by God in Daniel 9:24 to 9:27. The first one is to finish the transgression. The second, to put an end to sin. The third, to make reconciliation for iniquity. The fourth, to bring in everlasting righteousness. The fifth, to seal up vision and prophecy. And the sixth is to anoint the most holy. Now, most people read Daniel 9:24 to 9:27 and they just read through it, not realizing that there are 6 very clear, specific promises that God is making, saying this is my purpose for this event to take place, and this is what will be accomplished. Therefore, I'm giving you signposts. I'm telling you what I'm going to do and why I'm going to do it. And the end purpose is going to anoint the most holy, which means Jesus is coming back. This is that hope. When we look at the players, we then come into the realm of who are exactly the players. And is there a shift? And in this shift, we know biblically who the players are, not Rand McNally wise. So we know Moab, we know Edom, we know Aram, we know the Ishmaelites, we know the Girgashites, we know, but through geography and Rand McNally, we've made this last book of the Bible, the book of maps, somewhat confusing because we don't know the biblical landscape because we've allowed the pulpit and the English translation to convolute the people groups, because this was based on people groups. This was based on the dispersion, the diaspora, and the nations which rose up, which God specifically addresses in the future of the Arab states. He clearly tells you what part of Jordan will be saved and what part of Jordan will not. He clearly tells you whether or not there's going to be a believing Egypt. He tells you the future of Egypt. You're going to be cast out for 40 years. Okay? To pay you back for the 40 years of the Jews being in the desert, and then I'm going to bring you back in belief, and you're going to comply with Zechariah 14. Now, we don't know the timelines, but we do know the future of the Arab states based on who their population is, because he tells us their future. Okay? This one is there's not going to be a believing. Okay, Jordan, there are 3 parts. There's 3 people groups in Jordan. Moab will be saved. It tells us that. So when we look at Jordan, we look at Jordan as Jordan. When we look at Lebanon, we look at Lebanon. I challenge people, find Lebanon. Lebanon gained their independence from Turkey. So they were Turkey, and looking in what this biblical entity was. I would venture to say that the average person doesn't know that Syria was and is Assyria, because they're so disconnected from the biblical references. Looking at what the kings of the East, I hear about China all the time, but there's nowhere does it tell us that especially the three that came to see Jesus were from China. They were from Iran. They're from Iran and from Iraq. So when we look at Iran in political framework, which is what the average believer is out there looking at, is they're looking at this $150 billion deal. They're looking at Iran's relationship with Russia. They're immediately jumping to Ezekiel 38 and going, aha, the Gog of Magog, the unholy trinity is being formed, and Ezekiel 38 and 39 is coming to pass. And is it the next event? Or is there a complete renovation of the Middle East and a realignment? That God is using things like the discovery of the Leviathan gas reserve, and all of a sudden Israel is the leading provider of natural gas to Jordan. Is there something to the fact that the Golan Heights has now found the largest single oil reserve in the world that's under Israeli control? And it happens to be now. We've been there for 4,000 years, wondering why the geology is identical to all the oil-producing nations, but now today the revelation comes. Now we see a realignment of power. And Iran is central to it, and Tehran is as good as Nikita Khrushchev was at having us look everywhere but the truth through manipulation, propaganda, distraction, that we had no idea what Nikita Khrushchev was up to until all of a sudden we woke up one day and there were nuclear missiles in Cuba. Tehran is expert at deception. And yes, when the Soviet Union fell, some of the greatest scientists of the world left Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kiev, Odessa, and moved to Tehran, and assembled in Iran are some of the greatest Russian scientific minds of the modern day. People aren't looking at that. They're only looking at the media and not the Bible. We're talking with Mark Davidson, author of Iran's Great Invasion and Why It's Next in Bible Prophecy. It's a follow-on. It's the next step from the author of Daniel Revisited. And in this next segment, I'm going to have him walk us through this invasion, north, west, and south, and the warning that needs to be heard by everyone in our audience. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Mark Davidson, author of his new book, Iran's Great Invasion, and why it's next in Bible prophecy. When we left off, Mark was going to kind of take us in this transition from Daniel Revisited, and kind of connect some dots for us, identify the players of today, the alignment that's taking place, and what that signifies, and then what the ultimate warning or clarion call to awareness is. So take us through that, Mark.
All righty. Well, first of all, as I show in Daniel Revisited, the master timeline of these events is Daniel 7. The 4 beasts are 4 events, and the 7 heads of these beasts are 7 political nations, 7 players, and that we see what their identity via Revelation. We're in Revelation 13. It talks about this beast as a conglomeration of them all, and it is a mirror image of the dragon. And the dragon had 7 heads, 10 horns, crowns on the heads. So in ancient times, it tried to devour the woman. It tried to devour the man-child, Jesus Christ. And then the reflection of it in the end times, 7 heads, 10 horns like before, but the crowns move from the heads to the horns. And so these 7 nations who tried to destroy Israel in the past are today, that we have their end-time versions. And they are Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Albania, and ancient Islam, which is now end-time Islam. Ancient Islam, of course, ended in 1924 when the caliphate was disbanded, and we're seeing signs of it coming back, like most recently with ISIS, even though I heard al-Baghdadi was killed. These are warnings. Christ told us to watch, and with each event, things will get worse for us, for the world, the economy, etc. And that through this chaos, God has wonderfully placed in His Word these definitions of these events. We don't know how they start or how they end, but we see what they are, and these events will tell us that Christ is getting closer. They are told to us in no uncertain terms. And so with that said, the book Daniel Revisited was more for those who were interested in prophecy, more for those who were students. Mm-hmm. But I realized that because this next event, this Iran's invasion, it's going to be horrendous. It's going to turn the world upside down. According to what Daniel 7 and 8 and Revelation are telling us, this should have great impact on the world. You may have trouble getting to work. The price of gasoline and oil may go up many times over. You know, we had a cut of 6% back in the 70s, and that fully doubled the price of oil. Now we're talking 25% cut. Who knows what may happen? Not only that, but the Us Petrodollar will be ended. Iran has made it known that they want to end that system, and it's based on the Gulf oil. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states have been selling their oil in our dollars. Well, that will come to an end if Iran takes over. And so, again, as I had mentioned earlier, the sign to tell us specifically with Iran that the invasion would be next is the fact that a second power grows to become as large as the first, or greater than the first. And that Daniel 8:20 tells us these are the kings of Media and Persia. And you know, for a while I thought, well, that's 2 kings, but it's really not. It's 2 horns represent power bases, not kings. And that the supreme leader may be 1 king, but the IRGC actually consists of many kings. It takes many men to run the IRGC and command it. You know, you have General Soleimani with the Al-Quds force. You have other generals that run the bases, that run supply, that run PR, that run the Air Force and the Army, etc. So it's a group of kings. And so that those with the supreme leader are the kings of Media and Persia. Further, with the horn having grown up, the next event is for Iran to run out to the north and the west and the south. And if you look at a map, in fact, I still happen to have one back here, but it might be too far away or small. To the west of Susa lies Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. And we are told that that word west is actually seaward west. It's the root of the word comes from sea waves crashing on the beach. And that's exactly how far Iran will go. It's already course, working with Assad, who's a Shia leader, but in doing so, by spreading its revolution, it will run into the Sunni areas, western Iraq, northern Iraq, most of Syria, which are Sunni. It'll run to the north, and really the only way to run to the north would be, of course, through Iraq, but into eastern Turkey. And one of the, there's all kinds of little puzzles, and you wonder how things are going to happen, but God's word seems to be saying what it's saying. And I just realized that Albania, which is to be one of the 4 states joining Turkey, is actually coming across some, in the news, it's real subtle, you don't really see it, it's in the Balkan news, like in Serbia.
Right.
But Serbia has said that if Albania and Kosovo and other little nations that have Albanians in them were to combine, Serbia will declare war. And if we have an all-out war again in the Balkans between Serbia and Albania, Turkish troops would rally behind Albania, Russian troops would rally behind Serbia, and you'd either have outright conflict or at least a standoff, and that would tie down part of the Turkish military. Right. And that would, of course, pave the way for Iran to just walk right into eastern Turkey. To the south, this is where it's most interesting and has the biggest impact on the economy. That's where all the oil is. I mean, there's some oil in the northern Iraq, but the bulk of it is down in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. And none of their militaries could match Iran. What we will see with Iran is something like in the 1980s war with Iraq, where you saw wave after wave of hundreds of thousands of young Iranians running across the border. And we could see that very thing again. And no military in that region can stand up to it. The Turkish military, the Israelis, and the Egyptians, yes, but they're all out on the western coast. Iran will be free to do what it wants to do in the interior. And so Iran will erase, I believe, all of the European borders in the Middle East. The borders that we see, like you had mentioned before, like Lebanon, these were carved by the European powers. They really have no basis in ancient history or by the peoples. Lebanon's a conglomeration of people. I think they carved it just for the Christians, and now the Christians have decreased in number. So we're going to see a decrease in that, in the erasure of borders. We will also see great butchering of the population. We thought ISIS was rough, in that patch in western Iraq and Syria, the beheadings and so forth. I believe we're going to see this all over the Middle East when the true nature of Iran, the IRGC Shia troops, are unleashed. And so anyway, the effect by the oil being cut off is that when we have 25% of the oil possibly cut off, Iran can decide who they want to sell to. You're going to have nations like Germany and France and Italy that get part of their oil from the Middle East, from the Gulf actually, have to go to other sources like Venezuela, Mexico, Canada, Nigeria. My heart goes out to nations like South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, because those nations get all of their oil from the Gulf. And Japan, according to EIA.gov, the energy site,
right.
Excuse me. They 70% of their energy needs, both in electricity and in transportation and cars, comes from oil. And like I said, all their oil comes from the Gulf. And so they're going to be scrambling to finding other sources. So these nations are going to drive up the price tremendously. It's also possible that if Japan can't get the oil, then these free nations, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, may be very well under the thumb of China. And so when Revelation says the kings of the East, by the time the late tribulation comes along, these nations may have already been completely incorporated into China's empire and sphere. They would be under China's influence, and China, of course, could get its oil from Russia. Russia produces as much oil as Saudi Arabia. I do believe Russia will be in the same sphere as China, providing oil to China, and of course, because the oil price goes up, Russia will be immensely wealthy. But they're going to need it, because I believe that in order to support China, they need to stay independent. They need to stay apart from the Antichrist kingdom. I do not believe the Antichrist kingdom will take over the whole earth. I believe it will take over part of the earth. They may have authority over all nations and languages like Nebuchadnezzar did. But when it says he takes the whole earth, it'll be a fraction of it. There will be other nations withstanding. And as Daniel 9:24 through 9:27 says, I believe it's at the end of 9:26, it says, and war will continue until the end. The Antichrist and his kingdom will be fighting the rest of the world ad infinitum, all the way to the end. So this cutoff of the oil will probably deleteriously affect the West. We could find ourselves in a third world nation here in America. Our dollar, all paper dollars, all paper currencies always go to zero. They always hyperinflate. The only reason our nations has not is because of it being backed either by gold until 1971 or by oil, which is the Us Petrodollar Agreement. And for those who don't know the Petrodollar Agreement, basically it was where the Nixon administration struck a deal with Saudi Arabia and all the oil countries saying, if you sell all your oil in our US dollars, we will protect you militarily. And so, for instance, in 1990, when we went into Kuwait to free them from Saddam Hussein, that was our honoring of that agreement. Kuwait sold its oil in dollars all those years. And so we needed to go in and save it and defend it. Also, the ram is going to get to do all it wants to do, Daniel 8 says. And that's basically what the regime desires. And the regime, of course, besides causing hurt to the United States, they have stated that they want to cause chaos in the Muslim realm to extend their revolution and bring about Mahdi, but they also want to cause chaos in the world. And of course, cutting off the oil would do that. They wish to establish a Shia, their jurisprudent, or guardian of the jurisprudent is what it's called in English. That's Ayatollah Khomeini's philosophy.
Right.
And Khamenei, the current supreme leader, is continuing that. And what they want to do then is, it's the idea of one leader running the entire Muslim world, waiting for Mahdi to come. And so they will go into Saudi Arabia. And it's like what Daniel 7 says. You notice the ram has one horn higher than the other. Well, the bear in Daniel 7 also has one side higher than the other. It has 3 ribs in its mouth, which I believe is the same as the 3 directions, north, south, and west. And it's told to get up and devour many animals, many beasts, which would be assumed to be other countries, many. And that word for devour, it seems to be more like gorge. It seems to be more like it can't even bear to contain all of it. It's just going to completely stuff itself. And so Iran would go into Saudi Arabia and end that government and take over. It would go into Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Oman even. It would go into Iraq, it would go into Syria, go into Eastern Turkey, and establish local governments of Shia Islam to convert the people. Just as ISIS was trying to convert everyone to its brand of Islam, so will Iran. And the impact on the world, of course, is that it'll set us on a path for the tribulation. When the Antichrist finally shows up with his mark, a lot of countries will be too poor or will be starving, and they may very well bow into this. And when an Antichrist can back this up by controlling 1/4 of the world's oil right off the bat. So the warning here is that, well, let me back up a second. The warning here is that, first of all, I believe that when Christ was speaking in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, that when he said there will be wars and rumors of wars, and then there will be famines, and then there will be just seismos. Our English Bible, of course, says earthquake, but I don't believe it's earthquake. I believe it's disaster, because, for instance, when the Sea of Galilee storm came up and Jesus was walking on the water, that was a seismos. So obviously that wasn't an earthquake. But when these things occur, they're going to be bad. And Jesus said, don't be afraid. And that word for afraid in Matthew 24 is not the typical word that's used elsewhere the other 100 times. It is a very special word. It's only been used, I think, only once or twice in the whole New Testament. And it looks like the scholars, the Greek scholars, had to go to secular sources to find out what it meant. But it means, do not scream in terror. I mean, this is fear to the nth degree. And so if he tells us not to do this, that means we're going to feel like doing it, and so will the rest of the world. But he has wonderfully put in his word these events, that they are expected. God's in control. This is his plan. Yes, it may be terrible, but as long as you're following him and in him, you can rely on him to take care of you. And that these events are showing us that Christ is coming. It's not like, well, Christ may come at some point, and we know he will, but when? Well, now we will see event after event. And I believe it's kind of like a double-edged sword here, that this is wonderful that these events are happening because Christ is coming, but they're going to be chaotic and awful at the same time. And so just as we might feel like falling into despair more, we're also given knowledge that these in themselves aren't just despairing events, but they also tell us Christ is coming. Very definitely. And we can see each event.
Absolutely.
That's getting closer.
Very, very clearly, the increase in demonic activity, the growth of Islam, the clear signs of lawlessness, of disregard for there is a form of godliness that is not godly. There's a gospel that is not the gospel. There's every attribute that's attributed to a demon is foretold in 2 Timothy as an attribute of a man in these last days. So we are seeing this play out. I do see China aligning with Russia, and that brings North Korea into that trinity of nations. I don't think that there's going to be the stand that America wants China to take against North Korea.
That's right.
I think that alignment between Russia, China, and North Korea will solidify that portion of the East and the North. Now, of course, then we contend with a description of going due north from Jerusalem. The world has read the map in such a way as to say that Moscow is that direct path. But the direct path is not, that's the end of the northern path. You have to pass through the capital of Turkey, due north of Jerusalem, which is why I'm so inclined to believe that out of Turkey we're going to see something quite spectacular in the coming years, of a broker, of someone that is 1 foot in NATO, 1 foot in the Arab world, 1 foot in the Christian world, 1 foot in the Islamic world, and is going to be the only one who is going to be able to command the attention of bringing parties together to broker an agreement. When I look due north of Jerusalem and I get to Ankara, I'm not worried about Moscow. I'm looking at the road due north. And I think that we've for 30, 40 years just jumped to this Russia, Moscow, and we have not looked at the Bible or the map to understand that the gateway country to Europe, Asia, and Africa is that Turkey-Israel land bridge, and those are the 3 continents of the Bible, and it's why that's where our focus has to be. We can't get caught up.
Yeah, I don't believe Russia will invade the Middle East. I don't believe that scenario. Russia is using Iran because Russia has had to deal with Sunni Islam for its whole 1,000 years of existence, and it's using Iran as a thorn in the side to its Sunni enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the news talks about how Russia is an ally of Assad. It's not. Russia is only helping Assad because it wants to do everything Iran wants it to do.
Oh, you're exactly right. We've been talking with Mark Davidson, author of Iran's Great Invasion and Why It's Next in Bible Prophecy. You can get it online, visit ignitingnation.com, and click on this book and order it, get it for yourself, and study right alongside Mark, and get yourself a copy of Daniel Revisited while you're at it. We want to thank you so much for being with us here on this Friday afternoon edition of Revealing the Truth, and we thank Mark Davidson and the great work you're doing. Look forward to your next book and seeing you right here on Revealing the Truth in the future. And so until we meet, I look forward to it. Thank you so much. And that brings to an end our broadcast day as well as our live broadcast week. However, you can continue to watch all of our programs 24/7 at inbn.com, and every one of our programs is archived on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, so you don't have to miss a single episode. If you want to subscribe to 10 years worth of prophecy teachings as well as biblical teachings from the Jewish roots perspective, go to the Teaching Archive section at ignitinganation.com and sign up for our teaching archives. You can also see a list of our upcoming guests and subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter that keeps you up to date about who is coming on the program as we're booked out into the coming months. We thank you for being a part of the incredible growth of over 350,000 social media followers and hundreds of thousands of you watching us each and every day right here at the Igniting a Nation Broadcasting Network. So until we see you back here live in studio on Monday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time, I bid you Shabbat Shalom. I bid you Shalom. And for the coming week, a Shavua Tov, a great week. Until we see you next week, right here, we bid you Shalom.